A few months ago, I released my video about building a roster for a Disney Smash Bros, and I got a lot of comments about what DLC characters people wanted in the game. I also got a few comments about what potential stages and assist trophy characters could be in the game. So I decided to make this follow-up video going over those ideas. Welcome to part 2 of building a roster for a Disney Smash Bros. Like the base roster, I'm going to give this game a collection of 30 stages. However, there are some characters in the base roster that don't really have an iconic location that would be a highly requested stage, and on the flip side, there are some franchises that didn't have a character, but have some really good stage picks. So even though the number of characters and stages will be equal, not every character will have a stage, and not every stage will have a character. For the first stage, we're starting the way many Disney movies start, at the iconic Cinderella Castle. This would be your simple stage with characters fighting on a platform with the castle visible in the background. Next will be the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. Mickey usually doesn't stay put in a single spot for long, but the clubhouse is probably the most recognizable locale from his history. Next up, Mount Olympus from Hercules would be a pretty fun stage. You could have the different gods of Olympus watching in the background, and could have the Titans show up as a stage hazard. For Mulan, they can easily go with the Chinatown stage, and for Jack Skellington, they can bring in the Halloween Town. The Beast could have the dining hall of the castle for a stage, with the different living objects going about their day in the background. And for Aladdin, Agrabah would be an easy grab for a stage. Another fun stage would be Neverland, with Peter Pan, Wendy, and her brothers flying in the background. For a Lilo and Stitch stage, we could have a Hawaiian beach with aliens from the movies and maybe even the TV show appearing as either a background character or a stage hazard. Next up, for a Rapunzel stage, I think the Lantern Festival would be a great pick for a more visually appealing stage. Maybe you could hit the lanterns and they would have a chance to drop items when broken. A really fun idea I had would be a retro-themed Wreck-It Ralph stage. Smash Bros has a bunch of retro pixel art stages, so having the Fix-It Felix Jr. arcade machine as a stage fits that really well. You'd be fighting on the building as a pixelated Ralph knocks debris all over the stage as a hazard. Another out there stage idea would be Tamatoa from Moana. Tamatoa himself would be the stage, with the fight taking place on his back. He would move around, which would make half the fight just trying to not fall off his back. For a Pirates of the Caribbean stage, you could fight on Jack Sparrow's ship with his crew populating the stage. And as I mentioned in the first Disney Smash video, you could definitely get a really beautiful Pandora stage for Avatar. For an Incredibles stage, you would have it take place in the city, but Syndrome's robots would be rampaging across in the background. You could have the entire Incredibles family fighting in the background as well, although Mr. Incredible wouldn't be in the background if someone was playing as him in the match. For Monsters Inc., we of course have to go with the Scare Floor. A really fun but out there idea is that the stage could be a box with no blast zones, and the only way to eliminate opponents is to hit them into one of the doors. The doors would randomly open and close, making it so the place you can KO opponents would constantly change during the fight. Toy Story obviously has to have Andy's room for their stage. You could easily fill the stage with characters from across the franchise as the background. You could also have some of these toys be stage hazards. Wall-E stage could use the By and Large space station, and you could have the people in their hover chairs moving around the stage as a stage hazard. Since it's a space station, you could also include a gimmick where gravity gets messed with, making gravity get weaker or stronger at certain times or certain places on the stage. Scrooge's Mansion would work well for a DuckTales stage, and Doofenshmirtz Evil Incorporated is the perfect location for a Phineas and Ferb stage. And Springfield would also be an easy pick for a Simpsons stage. The Muppets could have a fun Muppets Theater stage, and you could fill the backroom with tons of different cameos from different Muppets from the show. To represent Marvel, I figured the Avengers Tower would be a good way to represent Marvel as a whole. You would have different heroes relaxing in the background, or you could have a fight scene outside the building that different heroes would be partaking in. And for Star Wars, Tatooine seems to be Disney's go-to place for Star Wars stuff, so I think that would most likely be our Star Wars stage. You could have it take place in the cantina, and the background can once again be filled with different character cameos. It would definitely have to include the aliens playing music as well. Now to include a few franchises without characters. Atlantis: The Lost Empire is a movie that didn't do too well when it was first released, but it definitely has a lot of fans, and Atlantis itself would make a very beautiful stage. A much more recent film with great stage potential is Encanto, and Casito would work great as a stage. Different family members could appear in the background and could use their different gifts to change up the stage mid-fight. Cars is a fairly popular Pixar franchise that I unfortunately just cannot see having a fighter. However, Radiator Springs makes a lot of sense for a stage. All sorts of characters and buildings from the town could show up in the background, and you could also have cars racing by as a hazard similar to the Mario Kart tracks in Smash Bros. Another Pixar franchise that doesn't really work as a fighter but does work really well as a stage is Ratatouille, using the restaurant as the stage. Remy Linguini would run around the restaurant serving guests in the background. One more Pixar stage could be the house from Up, where you'd fight on top of the roof of the house. I doubt they would go with this idea, but I think it'd be really funny if you could pop the balloons holding up the house. If enough are popped, the house would start falling and would essentially just remove the stage. At that point, players who would just fall and die after respawning, and whoever had the most stocks when the house fell would pretty much just win. And for a Disney TV show stage, we have to go with the Mystery Shack from Gravity Falls. Once again, you can fill the background of the stage with characters from the show, and you can also have different supernatural creatures appear and change up the stage. And there we go, 30 stages. Next, the assist trophies. I'm going to use the same guidelines as the stages. There will be 30 assists, most of them will be from already represented franchises, but some will be from completely new ones. Starting off the assists, I'm going with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Ever since the Epic Mickey games, Oswald has pretty much been Disney's big cameo guy, so I think the assist trophy role worked well for him. He could use the paintbrush to paint on the stage, similar to Bowser Jr.'s Final Smash. Next will be the 7 Dwarves. I suggested they could be part of Snow White's moveset in the last video, but even if they're also part of her moveset, they could also appear here as an assist. The dwarves would swarm the stage swinging their pickaxes. Each one wouldn't do too much damage, but with the 7 on the stage, that damage can rack up quickly. For Hercules assists, I'm going with Pegasus. When summoned, he will fly around the stage at high speed, damaging any opponents he hits mid-flight. Some assists just need to run up to your opponent and start beating them up. Li Shang from Mulan is one of many characters who would work well for this kind of assist. He'd be a simple offensive assist who would attack opponents with his staff. And for another standard attack assist, Gaston from Beauty and the Beast would throw out a few heavy punches to hit his opponents. For an Aladdin assist, the magic carpet could be used as a temporary platform. Similarly, Tinkerbell could give the person that summoned her temporary flight, which would probably just function as infinite air jumps. Since we have Stitch as a fighter, I figured it would make sense to have Lilo appear as an assist. She would do a hula dance which would heal whoever summoned her. Next for Wreck-It Ralph, Calhoun would use her guns to fire at opponents. Disney would probably want Olaf in this game in some way, so he can be the sort of joke assist. He would kinda just hop around the stage for a bit after being summoned, doing a tiny amount of damage if he accidentally bumps into someone. Really, any of the supporting heroes from Big Hero 6 would work well for an assist, but out of all their abilities, I decided that Honey Lemon had the most interesting ability for an assist. She would throw over a few chem balls that would stick to the floor. If an opponent steps on them, they will be trapped and will have to mash out to escape, which will give other players an opportunity to attack. So we went with Maui as the Moana rep, we should at least bring Moana in as the assist. Water would rush onto the stage, but Moana would open certain parts in the water where players could be safe, so players will have to run to these open spaces to avoid getting pushed off the stage. There are a lot of options for an Incredibles assist, but I decided to look outside the family and ended up going with Frozone. Not only would he use Ice Blast to hit opponents, but he could also create temporary ice platforms that players could stand on until they melted. For Monsters Inc., I decided to go with Randall. After being summoned, he would immediately turn invisible. After a bit of time, he would appear next to an opponent and unleash a strong attack, similar to the Lyn assist in Smash Bros. Next, for Toy Story, I decided to go with Rex. A dinosaur rampage on the stage would work well for an assist. And for Wally, we could use Wally himself and have him throw trash blocks around the stage for his assist. While technically a different show than DuckTales, I think that Darkwing Duck should get represented in the game, and the shows are related enough that Darkwing could be this franchise's assist. Phineas and Ferb is up next, and similar to the dwarves for Snow White, I think that Doof could also work as assist along with being part of Perry's moveset. But for the assist, instead of having the Innator immediately self-destruct, Doof could actually use the Innator on the other players. Opponents that are hit could get some negative effect, such as being temporarily shrunk or poisoned. And since we use Bart as our Simpsons rep, we should probably bring in Homer as the franchise's assist. He would be another basic attack assist, and like Bart, he could use some of the moves he used in the Simpsons arcade game. There are a lot of Muppets you can choose for an assist, but I decided to go with Gonzo. When summoned, he would load himself into a cannon, and then launch himself at an opponent, doing a lot of damage to anyone he hits. Similarly, Marvel has a ton of superheroes to go for with an assist. I wanted to go with a character that wouldn't be a top pick for DLC, but still has a lot of popularity. I ended up going with Doctor Strange. He would open 2 portals in random spots on the stage, and if you jump into one or get launched into one, you would immediately get teleported to the other. And finally, for already repped franchises, Star Wars is another franchise with a large selection of characters to choose from. I ultimately decided to go with Palpatine, who would use his electricity, which would stun any opponents he's able to hit. Next for some assists for unrepresented franchises. First, I went with Robin Hood. He would be a simple projectile assist, and would launch a few arrows at opponents when summoned. Next up is the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. He would work similarly to the Shadow Assist in Smash Bros, and would temporarily slow down all opponents, making it the perfect opportunity for the person that summoned him to attack. For another more out there idea for an assist, I decided to pick Yzma from the Emperor's New Groove. When summoned, she would throw a potion at an opponent. Whoever it hits would be temporarily turned into a llama. Being a llama would make you a much easier target, as your moveset would be replaced by a weak llama moveset until the potion wears off. Next for some more Pixar characters. Flick from A Bug's Life is our next assist. He would function like the moon in Smash Bros, summoning the flaming bird, and it would crash onto the stage, hitting anyone within range of the blast. Earlier, I decided to give Cars some representation through a stage, but I also think you could give the franchise some more representation through an assist. When summoned, Mater would drive around and would use his hook to grab an opponent. After being hooked, he would drive off the stage, and the trapped opponent would have to mash to escape, just like the captain assist. Another good pick would be Joy from Inside Out. She would use positive feelings to create a healing ring around her, which would heal anyone inside the circle, even if they weren't the one that summoned her. One more Pixar assist will be May from Turning Red. After being summoned, she would turn into the red panda and start attacking opponents. For the last assist, I'm gonna go with Goliath from Gargoyles. He would be one final attack assist, but unlike other attack assists, he would use his wings and fly around and would exclusively attack opponents from the air. And that's it for the assists. The last thing on the list is the DLC characters. There are a lot of different ways that you could go for the DLC picks, but the first thing I wanted to figure out is how many DLC characters there will be. Disney owns so much, so there is no lack of options to choose from, but I also figured Disney would only want to pour so much money into this game. I decided to split the DLC into 3 fighter passes, each with 10 characters. So depending on how many characters you think they would be willing to add to this game, you can decide if you think the DLC would stop after the first, the second, or if all 3 passes would happen. But since this game is hypothetical anyways, and this is the follow-up video, I figured I would go big with the DLC roster. To start off the first fighter pass, the 1 fighter per franchise rule knocked a lot of characters out of the base roster, and I mentioned that DLC would get rid of that rule. So it's time to expand on Mickey and his friends with Donald Duck. Mickey and his friends would all be beginner-friendly characters, and Donald Duck would be a beginner-friendly rushdown character. He would mostly have up-close punches and kicks, and for fun he could have a move where he charges at an opponent. If it hits, he and the target would fight in a cloud of smoke, like a weaker raging demon. A franchise that almost got a spot on the base roster that I wanted to get early on in the DLC is Encanto. All sorts of family members could work as fighters thanks to their unique powers, but I ended up picking Isabella. Her powers involve manipulating flowers and other plants, which lends to a lot of moveset potential. She could work somewhat like Sylvanos in Rivals of Aether, covering the stage with flowers which could then be used for attacks and movement options. With multiple characters per franchise, Marvel would definitely get another character early in the DLC. Even though Marvel has a lot of history with their comics, like I mentioned with Iron Man in the first roster video, I think when it comes to a Disney crossover, the MCU should be the key factor in character picks. So the next DLC character will be Captain America. Similar to Iron Man, I think his Marvel vs. Capcom moveset would translate well into a platform fighter, so not much work has to be done here. Disney is usually strict with how many animated shows they let into their crossovers, which I wanted to carry over into the base roster. But I also wanted to get a few more in with the DLC, so our next character is going to be Kim Possible. She'd have some overlap with Perry since they would both be faster characters with spy gadgets, but both characters have enough unique tools that I think you would still make them play pretty differently. One of the hardest choices in the base roster was picking between Woody and Buzz, but now that we're on the DLC territory, we can bring in Woody to complete the duo. He would use his lasso for normal attacks, and he can call in Bullseye for his specials. I want to grab another villain for this roster, and I think that Ursula from The Little Mermaid would work great for the next villain. She would be a heavy grappler that could use her tentacles to grab opponents in close or medium range. She could also use the trident she took from King Trident at the end of the movie. Like Marvel, Star Wars is another big IP Disney bought that would be one of the first in line to get another character. I didn't want the second Star Wars character to be another character that mainly uses a lightsaber, so I think the Mandalorian is a good option for this slot. He could use the Darksaber for a few close-up attacks, but he would mainly use a zoner that uses guns to attack from a distance. One of the oldest properties in the Disney catalog is the Winnie the Pooh franchise. Winnie the Pooh characters definitely aren't known for combat, but I think Tigger has enough to work with for a moveset. He would have the highest jump in the game and would also have very high airspeed, but would be very weak on the ground, making him sort of a reverse Little Mac. We already got a second Toy Story character, but The Incredibles is another Pixar franchise that I think should really get a second character early on. So Mrs. Incredible would be joining Mr. Incredible in the roster. Her elastic ability would allow her normals to travel much further than other characters. She could also stretch her body in other ways for her special moves, such as turning herself into a parachute as a recovery. I already brought in 2 Star Wars characters, but Star Wars isn't the only thing Disney got when they bought Lucasfilm. So Indiana Jones will be rounding out the first season of DLC. His normal attacks would mostly consist of his trusty whip, and his specials can involve different artifacts from the different films. And his super would definitely have to be the iconic rolling boulder. For the second pack, I wanted to mostly avoid giving franchises a third character so that we can give more franchises second characters, but I figured it made sense to give an exception to the Mickey Mouse Gang. We already have Mickey and Donald, so let's complete the trio with Goofy. Due to how, well, goofy he is, he will likely take a page out of Phoenix Wright's book, and have a lot of his attacks be him fumbling around and accidentally hitting opponents. When it comes to Disney's original live-action movies, after Pirates of the Caribbean, the most common franchise to find its way into these crossovers is Tron. While there are a few characters that could work here, I ended up picking Tron himself. He would be a zoner character who would mostly rely on the disc for range attacks. He could also use the light cycle like how Wario uses his bike in Smash. And since we just mentioned Pirates of the Caribbean, I think it deserves a second character, so I'm gonna go with Davy Jones. Not only can he fight with his sword, but he could also attack using his tentacles and his crab claw. We have a few Disney princesses on this roster, but I think it's about time we bring in the Pixar princess, Merida. She would be a zoner who would use her bow and arrow for projectiles, but would also be fairly nimble, making it easier for her to escape opponents compared to other zoners. And for a final smash, have her summon her bearified mother to rampage across the screen. In the main roster, I picked Vanellope as the Wreck-It Ralph character, but I think the franchise has more than enough popularity to have Ralph appear as DLC. Ralph would be a very standard heavy character, with attacks that can destroy enemies in just a few hits, but those attacks are going to come out a lot slower. I wanted to grab another character from the Fox acquisition, and after looking at their library, one classic that I think would work well is Home Alone's Kevin McAllister. Kevin would be a trapper character who could set up tons of traps from throughout the movies that fighters would have to avoid while fighting him. He would be very weak up close, so it would be very important for him to get his traps set up as quickly as possible. Since we already have Kermit in the base roster, I think Miss Piggy would be the best second Muppets character. She's definitely one of the most violent Muppets, having used karate moves on people throughout Muppet history. She would be very light just like Kermit, but she'd have a bit more power behind her moves in exchange for a slower attack speed. For another classic side character, Baloo from the Jungle Book would work well as another heavyweight character, and his moveset can mostly incorporate dancing for his attacks. And for another classic villain, I decided to go with Hades from Hercules. He would mainly fight using fire, and for a super move he could bring in the Titans for a powerful attack. And for the last character for the second DLC pass, I wanted to bring in another TV character, and while he isn't the most likely pick, I would love to see Bill Cipher as a playable character. With Bill, you really want to embrace the weirdness, so along with using tons of objects and creatures from Gravity Falls as attacks, he could have a special move to randomly change his stats and moves. To keep this balance, his stats and moves couldn't become anything too overpowered, and what he changed into would be completely random. But he could switch from a zoner to a heavy to a rushdown in the matter of seconds, which would keep your opponents on their toes. Starting off the last DLC pass, I wanted to get one more Mickey Mouse character, so I decided to go with Pete, who would be a very easy to use heavyweight character. Next will be Winfred from Hocus Pocus. Being a witch, she would be a zoner character who would use different spells and potions to attack her opponents. She would also have a special that would steal health from the target, similar to Robin in Smash Bros. For one final Marvel character, I wanted to go with one that was not only a good representation for the beginning of the MCU, but also for more recent MCU projects, so I decided to go with Loki. Loki actually doesn't have a MVC moveset, so for this game we would mix both his classic god abilities with his recent TVA skills. He would be capable of fighting in close range with his daggers, medium range with his scepter, and long range with his magic attacks. He could even have something like Witch Time to represent time slipping. I want to include one more new Disney TV series, and wanted to go with a more recent one. So since we're on a streak of magical characters, let's go with Luz from the Owl House. She'd be another magical zoner, but she would specifically focus on elemental attacks. Since I went with Captain Hook in the base roster, Peter Pan will finally join near the end of the DLC. He would fight with a dagger and would have incredible airspeed and several jumps at the cost of being incredibly floaty, making him easy to KO. I wanted to grab one last classic Disney villain, and Dr. Facilier from The Princess and the Frog will be filling that role. He would use his cane for physical attacks and could use tarot cards as projectiles. And for his super move, he has to call in his friends from the other side. For the last Star Wars character, I figured we could loop back to another lightsaber user, but I definitely wanted one that would feel different from Darth Vader. So for the third and final Star Wars character, I went with Yoda. While he would still fight with his lightsaber and the Force, he would be a smaller, lighter character compared to Vader. And I would want him to mostly resemble Yoda from the prequel trilogy, so he would be able to use pretty fast attacks. At the beginning of the first Disney Smash video, I mentioned bringing in one of the more violent Fox characters as DLC, so I figured it's time to bring at least one of them in. The Xenomorph has already appeared in Mortal Kombat, so he does have a fighting game moveset to pull from, although obviously the violence would have to be turned way down. It would use its claws and its spiked tail for physical attacks, and it could spit acid at both the opponents as a projectile and the stage to set up puddles as traps. I figured that since we're so close to the end, we could probably get away with giving a TV show a second character. I decided to use Phineas since Phineas and Ferb has two sides, Phineas and Ferb themselves, and the Perry vs. Doof side. We already have Perry, so we should probably make sure that one of the brothers makes it in as well. Phineas would be able to use all sorts of inventions from the show, but since those inventions would make him a bit complex, I decided to not make Phineas and Ferb a duo, although Ferb could be an alternate costume like Olimar and Alf. And we're finally at the last character, and while it's a bit predictable, I decided to take a page out of Ultimate's book and have Sora from Kingdom Hearts as the last character. Whether they want to reuse his Smash moveset or revamp his kit to include more Disney-specific stuff is up to the hypothetical devs, but Sora as the final character makes even more sense for this game than it did for Smash Ultimate. And there we go. That is everything I have for this hypothetical Disney Smash Bros. Disney just owns so much that you could easily continue adding characters until the heat death of the universe, but this video has already taken way too long, so I think this is a good stopping point. Speaking of which, I just want to quickly apologize for how long it took for this video to come out. I plan on doing a sequel to PlayStation All-Stars as my next roster, and that one should not take nearly as long to come out as this one did. But with that, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.